Before we officially begin, there's probably a few housekeeping details that we ought to address. The first of these is that folks tell me that the workshop is worth 100 times more if you take notes. The reason for that is, unlike our forebears who did not have the printing press and the Xerox machine and who had good memories, we've come to rely on them. And the workshop here is as someone said, it's terribly logically ordered. And therefore, from the first moment when we begin with the first reading until literally the closing moment, there is a logic to what is taking place. And it's a somewhat different logic, since most of us were not brought up and nurtured in an ethic of nonviolence. So it's helpful to have a way of referring back after the workshop is over. Secondly, it truly is not the kind of experience where you're expected to have an instantaneous conversion. Really, it's more a presentation that the purpose of it is, after it's all over, to go home and to think about it and to, with friends, reflect on it, and something that hopefully will, in the long run, make a real difference in your life. But it's not something that is meant to generate an intense sense of urgency. And truly also, I've been doing this for 15 years now, this particular workshop. And it is truly not my intention to, if you don't agree with me, that's perfectly all right. One of the values of the workshop can be, that you clarify your own position. If your position is different from the one that I'm giving, and you clarify it and you feel more committed to it and more intense about it in terms of Christianity, that's a legitimate outcome. On the other hand, my position is what I'm giving you, I truly believe in. I believe this is the gospel. This is the most authentic understanding of the gospel that I can think through. In my mind, it is what Jesus was teaching. It is what Jesus wants us to follow. So, with that said, what I like to do as a way of beginning is I like to begin with a couple of readings from Holy Scripture this evening, as a way of starting off our weekend. The first reading is from Matthew 25, 31 to 46, and the second reading is from Luke 16. Matthew 25. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, escorted by all the angels, then he will take his seat on his throne, and all the nations of the world will be assembled before him. And he will separate people one from another, as the shepherd separates sheep from goats. He will place the sheep on his right hand and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, "Come, you whom my Father has blessed, take your heritage, the kingdom prepared for you since the foundation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Naked and you clothed me. Sick and you visited me. Imprisoned and you came to see me." Then the virtuous will say to him in reply, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you to drink? When did we see you a stranger and make you welcome, naked and clothe you, sick or in prison and go to see you? And the king will answer, I tell you solemnly, insofar as you did it to the least of my brothers or sisters, you did it unto me. Next he will say to those on his left hand, Go away from me with your curse upon you to the eternal fire prepared for the devil and for his angels. For I was hungry and you never gave me food. I was thirsty and you never gave me anything to drink. I was a stranger and you never welcomed me, naked and you never clothed me, sick and imprisoned and you never visited me. Then it will be their turn to ask, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, a stranger or naked or sick or imprisoned, and did not come to your help? Then he will answer, I tell you solemnly, insofar as you neglected to do this to one of the least of these, you neglected to do it to me. And they will go away to eternal death, and the virtuous to eternal life. The parallel parable to that gospel is found in Luke 16, and it reads like this, starting at verse 19. There was a rich man who used to dress in purple and fine linens, and feast magnificently every day. And at his gate there lay a poor man called Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to fill himself with the scraps that fell from the rich man's table. Dogs even came and licked his sores. Now the poor man died and was carried away by the angels to the bosom of Abraham, and the rich man also died and was buried. In his torment in Hades, the rich man looked up and saw Abraham a long way off with Lazarus in his bosom. So he cried out, Father Abraham, have pity on me. Send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames. My son, Abraham replied, Remember that during your life good things came your way, just as bad things came the way of Lazarus. Now he is being comforted while you are in agony. But that is not all. Between us and you a great gulf exists, to stop anyone, if he wanted to, crossing from our side to yours, or from your side to ours. The rich man replied, Father Abraham, I beg you then to send Lazarus to my father's house, since I have 5 brothers, to give them warning that they do not come to this place of torment. They have Moses and the prophets, said Abraham. Let them listen to them. Ah, no, Father Abraham, said the rich man. But if someone comes to them from the dead, they will repent. Then Abraham said to him, if they will not either listen to Moses or to the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone should rise from the dead. Back in 1953, Dwight Eisenhower said, "I don't care what God you believe in, just so long as you believe in God." Like so many other short, pithy sayings that sound on the surface as if they are the encapsulation of truth, they simply cannot bear any kind of critical analysis. The statement for a Christian, "I don't care what kind of God you believe in, just so long as you believe in God," is an absurdity. Can one really imagine Jesus saying, "I don't care what kind of God you believe in, just so long as you believe in God"? The fundamental question around which religious consciousness revolves, the fundamental question is, what kind of God is God if God exists? And what does God expect of people, if anything? Religious consciousness is initially grounded in a question. What kind of God is God if God exists? And what does God expect of me, if anything? The history of religion is a history of attempting to answer that question. Some say God is this, some say God is that. Some say God expects this, some say God expects that. Jesus, as the self-revelation of God, as the ultimate revealer of God and God's will, Jesus responds to that question, which is indelibly implanted on every consciousness of each human being. Jesus has something to say about what kind of God God is and what God expects. Part of what Jesus has to say is communicated in the two passages that we read tonight, Matthew 25 and Luke 16. There is no question among biblical scholars, scripture scholars, that the Matthew 25 passage, which we read, which is sometimes called the Last Judgment passage, or the Great Test passage, is in fact authentically Jesus. Not that the words are precisely Jesus' words, but it is in fact the theme that Jesus was communicating. So also with the Luke 16, the parallel parable to the Matthew 25, the story of Dives and Lazarus. Not necessarily that Jesus was the originator of that parable, but that indeed the theme embodied in that parable is a theme that Jesus was throughout his life trying to communicate. A theme about what kind of God God is and what God expects of people. Now, in the beginning, it's probably very, very important that we start off and try to be as clear as we can. It is your prerogative to accept or to reject Jesus as Messiah, as Christ. For the same question comes to you and me that came to Peter 2,000 years ago. Who do you say I am? Who is this person Jesus? Who is this person Jesus of Nazareth? It comes across century after century after century. Who is he? And therefore, I can say with Peter, or you can say with Peter, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Or I can say something else. You're a wise man. That's all. So it is possible, it is possible to reject the person of Jesus as Messiah. Very, very reasonable and very, very possible to simply say, I do not believe that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. But what is not possible is to accept the person and reject the teachings. It is possible to reject the person, but the person of Jesus is tied to an understanding of God and of God's will that is distinct from, say, the understanding of Mohammed, or the understanding of Moses, or the understanding of Buddha. It is a distinct understanding. Not that it's totally incompatible, but there are dimensions of it that are not compatible. For example, I would also say there are dimensions of the Playboy philosophy that are consistent with Jesus' teachings. But that doesn't mean the entire approach is consistent. It is not possible to accept the person of Jesus and to reject the teachings of Jesus. Why? Because there is no person of Jesus Christ available as a human being independent of his teachings. The only Jesus we know is the Jesus who is embodied in word and in deed. If we separate Christ from his teachings and adore and worship and follow and praise and proclaim a Jesus separate from the words and deeds of that Jesus, we are simply manufacturing idolatry. We are simply putting the name Jesus on top of our own personal predispositions to how we think the universe should run, to our understanding of what God is and what God's will is. Jesus becomes an idol, in other words, an idol, when his understanding of God and God's will for humanity is ignored and is replaced by someone else's understanding of God and God's will. All it amounts to, when we separate Jesus from his teachings, is that we simply want to garner a little religious respect for our own position. There is probably no better example in the Christian church today of separating Jesus from his teaching than can be found with the way the church deals with one of the clearest, most straightforward of Jesus' teachings, namely the teaching found in Matthew 25 and Luke 16, the teaching that we just read. What does the teaching say? What Matthew 25 and Luke 16 say in one sentence is this: that apathy in the face of relievable human misery is radical evil. Apathy in the face of relievable human misery is radical evil. For there is no way more serious, there is no language more available for communication that something is evil, radically evil, than to say that the consequences of it are that it ends in eternal damnation. That's the strongest language available to connotate evil in the human condition. And that's what Jesus says. Indifference to human suffering, relievable human suffering, apathy in the face of relievable human misery is radical evil. To put it another way, and let's prescind for a minute from all discussions about the nature of hell. We'll talk about that down the line a little bit, whether you perceive hell as in anthropomorphic terms as a devil with a pitchfork, or whether you perceive hell in psychological terms, that hell is an eternal nightmare that you create for yourself in this world and can't get out of it, or whether you perceive it in ontological terms, that is, hell is simply the extinction of being. However you perceive it, prescind from that from the moment. The point is, when someone says such and such an activity leads to eternal damnation, they are saying that this activity is contrary to the will of God, to what God is, to what God expects of you, to why God drew you out of nothingness, contrary to your very being. There is no stronger way of saying it. So that when Christ says that apathy in the face of relievable human misery is radical evil, he is saying something awfully specific about what kind of God God is and what God expects. Something that, for example, the Playboy philosophy does not say. And something that most of the gods that would be prayed to under Dwight Eisenhower's "I don't care what God you believe in, just so long as you believe in God," don't say. So, let's say it in a phrase. There is no surer way to damnation than apathy. This is strong stuff. You know how strong it is? So strong that it turned Bertrand Russell against Christianity. This passage, Bertrand Russell, one of the finest minds of the 20th century, this passage he found so unacceptable. He said it was demanding too much of human beings. It was too severe. He found Buddha far more compassionate. We'll look at that later on in the weekend. But the point that I like to make now is apathy seems to be a hallmark of contemporary society that we live in. Indeed, there is some case that can be made that apathy has become respectable human activity within the Christian community. Let me read you, this is from the Time magazine of a little while back, just one paragraph. It's talking about campuses, college campuses. And it says, "The loudest noise on campuses this year is the grind for grades. Corporate recruiters are drawing record crowds of students bringing good tidings. Job prospects for June graduates are the brightest in many years. Student demonstrations today are rare, and when they do erupt, the protest is not against some big political issue, but about local tuition increases. We are definitely apathetic," says Eric Morley of Haverford, "but it is a beneficial apathy. It is an apathy of satisfaction. We have been through enough for a while. We need a break. Now we can go forward and party without feeling a sense of remorse." God help us. Listen to the words. We are definitely apathetic. Proud of it. Proud of it. But it is a beneficial apathy. Beneficial to the one person that dies every 9 seconds of starvation? It is an apathy of satisfaction. Satisfying whom? We have been through enough for a while. 4 years at Haverford College. There's a tough life on this earth. We need a break. should have 11 children. Now we can go forth and party without feeling a sense of remorse. And there is the most damaging of the sentences. Why? Because evil has now become acceptable. As we will see tomorrow night, as Adolf Eichmann and others like them felt no remorse and no sense of evil in their destruction of the Jews, they were just going along as decent people in the society, so also this young man from a Quaker college, mind you, Christian college, says now we can go forth and party without feeling a sense of remorse. The question becomes, how did Eric Maui and others like him, how did they arrive at this diabolical state? For it is diabolical. Anything, the aim of which, the ultimate aim of which, the ultimate course of which, ends in as severe a destruction of the human being as can be organized in words to present to people, eternal damnation, that's diabolical. How was it that this student, or student adult, was transformed from a potentially committed change agent, from someone who could respond to suffering, relieve suffering, inspire others to relieve suffering, changed from a potentially committed change agent for the good to a passive, tranquil, highly intelligent, indifferent observer of the scene of human pain. Here is a person, and others like him, who can climb mountains, can program computers, can talk 3 or 4 languages, can take shorthand, can type, can study Milton and Shakespeare and Hegel and Aristotle, can understand number theories, can understand the theory of evolution and so forth and so on, the makeup of Venus, the makeup of the stars. And who is also indifferent to the scene of pain that surrounds him. Nietzsche, a century ago, refers to the educated class, that's you and I, for we are educated, refers to the educated class as moral dwarfs. Moral dwarfs. Courage is their weak suit. Conceptualization is their strong suit. And one wonders, in the early 1980s, is there anything, as one looks at the educated class, that would say that Nietzsche was wrong? Think, for example, when Gandhi was asked what made him the saddest in the human situation, he responded, "What makes me the saddest in the human situation is the realization of the hardness of heart of the educated class." The realization of the hardness of heart of the educated class. Simone Weil, the Jewish Christian philosopher who died during the Second World War, French woman, makes the point that what is done to the poor in war by bombs is done to the poor in peacetime by the indifference of the middle class. All this is simply a restatement, whether it's Gandhi, or whether it's Simone Weil, or whether it's Nietzsche, of the theme that Jesus was talking about in Matthew 25 and Luke 16. The theme of apathy in the face of relievable human misery. Today we function in a world and in a church, for the most part, that whatever is said in rhetoric, operationally, we have developed an ethics of justified apathy. Literally, by Jesus' standards, that would mean an ethics of radical evil. Everyone would say, but of course, I am not apathetic. I'm not apathetic. I am not an apathetic person. How dare you say that? That's a gross misjudgment. And of course, we never mean to judge anyone's life individually. There is no place in the Christian world, it seems to me, for judging individuals' moral life. That is the moral life of individuals other than oneself. But we can talk about phenomena. The ethics of justified apathy in our society masquerade under the name of the justified pursuit of the good life for me and mine. The justified pursuit of the good life for me and for mine. As Thomas Merton says, the average American Catholic is more concerned about his dog and cat than about starving children. True or not true? The ethics of justified apathy, masquerading as the justified pursuit of the good life for me and mine. Mind you, it is not that the educated class does not know that there is misery in the world, does not know the misery of others. It simply means that the educated class just doesn't care. And that is what made Gandhi talk about it as the thing that made him the saddest. Why? Because with education comes the possibility to do something, to respond. Have you ever heard of such a foolish thing as someone, say, who becomes a doctor? A doctor saying, after, how long does it take to become a doctor? 10 years or something after high school. A doctor saying, I did it myself, you know. I studied 10 years. 10 years of hard work I did. 10 years of hard work. I became a doctor by myself. Nonsense. Nonsense. All the billions of people that had to do all the trillions of things to allow that person the kind of leisure time. Someone had to grow his food. Someone had to keep his sewers clean. Someone had to keep the lights going. Someone had to keep the water going. On and on and on. 1,000,001 things. 1,000,001 things. The point is, whether it's doctor or lawyer or teacher or engineer or agricultural expert or you name it, the point is that education brings with it a power to relieve pain. As it also brings with it the power for further self-indulgence, further indifference to pain. And so, it made Gandhi sad because the potential was there to do good and it was not being executed. Apathy, of course, does not mean that one cannot be motivated. Think about it. Think how the educated class, that's you and I, is motivated by power, by the desire for prestige, by the desire for more money, by the desire for little tidbits of luxury. Think how the educated class is motivated by the prospect of sexual titillation. Oh yes, the educated class can be motivated to incredibly intense levels of commitment and creativity. It's just that, for the most part, the pain of others can't motivate. Now, I've only been a priest 3 months, but I've talked to hundreds, literally hundreds of priests, and I have never heard a priest, in talking to a priest, I've asked, and no priest has ever told me that anyone has ever come into confession and said, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned, I've been apathetic." Why not? Why not? Where is it that anyone who proclaims the gospel, where does he get the right, or she get the right, to proclaim a gospel that emphasizes something that Jesus didn't emphasize and de-emphasizes something that Jesus emphasized? A serious problem, it would seem to me. If Jesus, who is the self-revelation of God, the Son of God, says that apathy results in these terrible consequences for a human being, terrible, terrible consequences, where does the individual or collective Christian community get the right not to proclaim that? Or get the right to proclaim something else in its place, as being far more serious? I would take, for example, just to be very, very straightforward about it, that there are all kinds of things in the sexual world that Jesus doesn't have a word to say about in the gospel. Or if he does have a word, it's a passing word. Not that they're unimportant, and not, indeed, am I saying that they're not sinful. But there is a problem of emphasis. Is it necessary, in order to proclaim the gospel authentically, to emphasize what Jesus emphasized? At least where the themes are really clear and where what's being talked about is of intense seriousness. Why don't people feel the need to confess? To confess to the entire community, either in the entire Christian community, either in a communal penance service or an individual penance service, the sin of apathy. I submit it never even enters people's minds to confess it, because it's not operationally part of the religious thinking of most Christians as anything that's sinful. It's a non-thought. It's a non-thought. Oh, we all know what it's like, don't we? We've all heard it, we've all said it in many ways, We've all covered up our apathy with all kinds of phrases like, look, I care. I really care about the world. But I can't change the world. We must make no mistake about it. Most of the educated class does not have any intention of changing a world that grants them such pleasure and privilege as a way of life. They're not even going to change the world at the place where the world is closest to them, namely his or her own life, where it could be changed. This business about, I can't change the world, such unambitious ethical expectations of themselves. It's a kind of a false humblehood, if you will. And of course, it's a low-cost way of telling ourselves that we are decent people. But decent is not a gospel standard. One can be decent and damned. Decent is a cultural normative standard, not gospel standard. The fact of the matter is that the moral dwarf, a member of the educated class, who lives in a church or in a secular society that justifies for him or her apathy in the face of relievable human misery, knows very, very, very clearly what's at stake. For what's at stake is this: mind, time, and money spent in one direction is mind, time, and money that can't be spent in another direction. The money that I spend on the booze, on the drugs, on the fashion, you know, the lapel, half inch here, half inch there, for all of us. And on and on and on is the money I can't spend to relieve pain. No one is talking about living in destitution. What we're talking about is luxury wealth. Money, time, and mind spent in one direction is money, time, and mind that can't be spent in another. Mind. Mind. 30 million people every weekend, Friday and Saturday, sit down and watch. Little leather ball go over a chalk line. Little leather ball come through strings. Little round rubber thing go across ice and go into a net. Little ball go into a cup. 30 million people. Weekend in and weekend out. Mind. Mind. The Boston Celtics even have a priest for a scorekeeper. We're not talking about being physically fit now. That's, I mean, you have to physically exercise with muscles and so forth. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the use of mind, time, and money for activity that is clearly non-necessary. Many years ago, about 8 years ago now, a famous lady in Boston was caught buying $10,000 worth of underwear. Now you and I would say she's sick. Who needs $10,000 worth of underwear? Why can't that money be sent, some other place? There's one person dying every 9 seconds of starvation. 15 million children a year die of starvation. $10,000 worth of underwear in 1 year? To say nothing of the money, the mind and time that has to go into procuring it. Can you imagine walking around Bonwood Teller and so forth and so on, picking out underwear to the tune of $10,000? To give that kind of mental energy and human time over to that? But it's easy to pick on the lady, huh? But then when we get down to our own lives, how much of the same thing is going on? Totally non-necessary things that have become vital to us. Non-necessary vitals. Things that are absolutely not needed for our existence, for our betterment, and we use up time, mind, and money because they titillate us in some way. They satisfy ego in some way. And we prefer to do that than to use time, mind, and money, same time, mind, and money, to be concerned about the relief of the pain of others. The moral dwarf, the apathetic, educated person, knows full well that there is an irrevocable connection between his or her luxury and other folks' misery. He or she knows perfectly well that where there are victims, there are victimizers. And where there are victims and victimizers, there are people who profit from victimization. But the educated, apathetic person, knowing all this very, very well, knowing very, very well this, comforts him or herself with a great lie. And the great lie is this: that progress for the poor will come, relief to those who are suffering will come, without any sacrifice on my part. Progress for the oppressed will come without my taking any risk. Pain for suffering humanity will be relieved without any diligent work on my part. The wretched of the earth somehow will become better without my encountering any danger. That the lifestyle of the suffering people of the third world will somehow be improved. My lifestyle could stay the same. But things will get better. Somehow the poor will get richer. This is the lie. Somehow the all-day lines of pain of poor people in clinics and hospitals will go away. Somehow the sick will be healed. The lie is that somehow the lame will walk. The lie is that somehow the imprisoned will no longer be tortured by guards and raped by fellow inmates. The lie is that progress will come to the wretched of the earth while I sit home and watch TV. It's a lie. While I sit home and pour money into booze and drugs and fashion, it's a lie. It can't happen. In every other area of life, it is known as a fact that if you want something to be done, you've got to put time, mind, and money into it. You want to send up a space shuttle, you've got to put massive amounts of time, mind, and money. However, when it is the lot of the wretched of the earth that's being discussed, that kind of diligent work and risk and sacrifice is not needed. Somehow, the lie goes, things will get better for the poor while I party without feeling a sense of remorse. Pray for them. Pray for them. I suppose, I'm not sure how many here are Catholic, but since I'm Catholic, I think we'll just use a little bit of ecumenical etiquette here and give you one final example of what we're talking about apathy. As an evil, a radical evil that has become good in the operation in the eyes of Christians. Can you imagine what the state of Catholic Christianity would be in the United States if for the last 30 years the Catholic educational system had put as much time and mind and money into communicating to students who went through that system, whether CCD or schools? Jesus' teaching on the seriousness, the radical seriousness of apathy in the face of relievable human misery that the Catholic school system has put into making state champs of one school or another. Whether it's basketball or hockey or football or whatever. Think about it. The way it's just not 12 players or 6 players or whatever the case may be. It's entire schools and resources and mind and energy. State champs. Where is the gospel being proclaimed there? Very serious problem. We have reached the point with the problem of apathy in the face of relievable human misery that we no longer see apathy as sinful. And Jesus' communication is, it is radically evil. Something is askew. Something is askew. And so, what basically we're trying to communicate here this evening is that to proclaim Christ is Lord is to accept the person and his teachings. There is no way simply to accept the person, to use Christ as a justification for sitting home and allowing people simply to pass out of existence as tramps in the street, while using up one's mind and one's time and one's money on things that are utterly unnecessary for human life, indeed detrimental in many cases. In essence, when we ask the question, what kind of God is God if God exists, and what does God expect of us, if anything? And we answer that through the teachings of Jesus. It seems to me that the answers run something like this. That Christ seems to agree, or maybe the vice versa, this probably is vice versa. Rollo May seems to agree with Christ when he says that the central moral problem of the last half of the 20th century is the problem of perceptual courage. Perceptual courage. The courage to see what is there. Remember the question, that dives in Matthew 25, Lord, where did we see you? There was no problem with the rich man seeing Lazarus. He was at his gate. There was no, quote, unquote, there was no problem in the black world, Remember the book, what's his name there? The Invisible, not the Invisible, lost it. Anyway, I'll think of it in a second. Or Michael Harrington's book on poverty in 1962. No poverty in the United States till Michael Harrington's book. James Baldwin, I think it was. The author. No, the author, not the author. I'll probably think of it at 3 o'clock this morning and say, that's it. But the problem of perceptual courage. There's no problem in knowing what's there. To what extent do we really have to ask ourselves, do we truly want to see what has to be done? Or are we satisfied simply with having we just beg to have someone cloud our minds. So we won't see. Because to see is the first step towards having to do something. And if we don't see, we never have to choose to do anything. Seems to me that Bertrand Russell is right. This is an awfully hard teaching. And it's even made harder, if you think about it, because the passage refers to all the nations of the world are being judged by this standard. And it can be asked, how is it possible for human beings to be judged by this standard as a minimal standard of what it means to be human if they've never known Christ? Seems totally unfair. Simone Weil, in one of her books, writes that it is a first principle of her philosophy. That is, it does not have to be proved. It's given in the human situation. To be born is to be born in the first instance into the obligation to respond to human suffering. Needs no proof. For to be born means to be more than born physically. It means more than to come out of nothingness. To be born a human being means that you must be born into a situation, and that situation means you're surrounded by suffering. It is self-evident that one of the reasons you're born is to respond to that. As you would like to be helped if you were suffering, so others would like to be helped. It becomes important to reflect on what is being said in Matthew 25 and Luke 16 about what kind of God God is and what God expects. Seems to me that what's being said is that where apathy is, Christianity isn't. It seems to me that what's being said is where human misery is being ignored, Christ is being ignored, and all the cult in the world is no substitute. It seems to me that what's being said is that where the tears of those in pain go unmet, it's a sure sign that God is absent, that God is not loved. It seems to me that what is being said is where the misery of others is the basis of the luxury for others, that God is furious. If you look around you today, and if you see wars, and if you see misery and destruction, and famine, it is not because God created them. It's not because there's not enough to feed everybody. And it is not because the world is out of control. It is because the world is in control. For what can be expected in a world where $88 billion is spent in 1 year on horse, dog, and harness racing in this society? $88 billion to watch animals run around in circles. $88 billion. What kind of consciousness does that take? To do that and to allow that to happen? And what else can you be creating but a hell on earth? It is because the moral order is working correctly that we have what we have, not because God's moral order isn't working. Be assured, be absolutely assured, that anyone that talks about disarming this society without talking about simultaneously changing the standard of living of people in this society is talking a pipe dream. For this is a level of luxury that the rich man Dives never knew. And luxury property rights can only be protected, kept from. The people who do not have the necessities of life can only be kept from them by the sword. When I have more than enough to live, and someone else does not have enough to literally, physically live, the only way I can keep that person off my back is with the gun. The society that is steeped as no other society in the history of the world with the accumulation of tidbits of luxury needs the most powerful army ever created to protect it. There is no alternative. And so, where is it in the gospel that Jesus says, "Happy are the fun people, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven"? Not there. It's not there. It probably is a way of summing this up is to quote a couple of our holy ancestors, St. Basil and St. John Chrysostom. St. Basil says to his Christian community, "The extra loaf of bread you have in the cupboard belongs to the hungry man. The extra cloak you have in the closet belongs to the naked man. The money you have hidden in the ground belongs to the poor man." Very serious stuff. He's not talking about what is legally ours. He's talking about as brothers and sisters in Christ, as children of God, we are put here, as Simone Weil says, clearly to help the suffering of others, to help relieve it. St. John Chrysostom says, and how's this for a standard of charity? Seldom preached. Beyond that, seldom practiced. The measure of our Christian charity is not how much we give. The measure of our Christian charity is how much we have left after we give, which is a totally different standard. You remember how Dives and Lazarus closes? Dives and Lazarus closes with the rich man saying to Abraham, "Would you at least send Lazarus back to my brothers and tell them what happens when someone is apathetic in the face of relievable human misery? Tell them what happens to such a person." And remember what the closing remark is? It is, "I tell you solemnly that even if someone rose from the dead, they wouldn't believe him." And that is precisely the situation that we're in. The resurrection is many things, but one of the things is that it's confirmation that Jesus and his teachings are true, are the way, the truth, and the life. It's not only that we don't believe them. For the most part, operationally, we don't even teach them anymore. Apathy is not an operational moral concept in most of Christianity. So let me conclude with just the possibility that it is possible to use Jesus. It is possible to use all that was created in the name of Jesus. It is possible to use his life, his death, his passion, and his resurrection to justify, to religiously legitimatize, to say it is God's will to something that is just the opposite of what Jesus proclaimed. To actively promote a kind of Christianity by omission, by silence, by indifference, and by lack of emphasis, to actively promote a kind of Christianity that is not consistent with the major thrust, with a major thrust of Jesus' teachings. Indeed, that is diametrically opposed. This workshop is a theology of Christian nonviolence. There is a tendency to equate nonviolence with pacifism. P-A-S-S-I-V-E-S-I-M. Pacifism. It is not. It's pacifism. P-A-C. Pacifism. At the heart of Jesus' teachings of nonviolent love, at the heart is the willingness to take the enormous risk, to have the courage, to do the diligent work, to take the risk, to live the dangers, to make the sacrifices, to endure the pain, to relieve the suffering of other human beings as he would have relieved it. It is far from passive. It is extraordinarily active. And if one looks at the world in which we live, the nature of violence is to protect a passive, indolent, indulgent life. Where we work at, not even recognizing the connection between the good life that we possess and the terrible life that other people in the world have to endure. For where there are victims, there are victimizers. And where there are victimizers, there are those who profit from victimization. Let me conclude with one story. I was born and brought up in the city of Malden, Massachusetts. And all my life I used to go to the factory store next to the original Converse rubber plant where they made sneakers and rubbers and so forth. And the factory store was 100 feet away, and the money that was saved in transporting the sneakers 100 feet rather than to the local shoe store, they would take off the price, and so it was good to go to the factory store. So all my life I used to go there. A few years ago, I went there to get a pair of sneakers. And I looked, and here was a pair of sneakers, and the cost was $13. Fine. I looked over here, and here's the exact same pair of sneakers, and the cost is $10. And I figured these must be second-hand, and say there's a bargain here, and I look at, they're the same sneakers. And I'm looking, and they're the same sneakers. And I couldn't believe it. And I thought, well, maybe they've mismarked them. But no, there's a whole bin of them, and a whole bin here. And they're not. These are 13, and these are 10, and they're precisely the same sneakers. Difference is, the sneakers that were 13 were made 100 feet away in the Converse rubber factory. The sneakers that were 10 were made 7,500 miles away in South Korea. You know how that's done? Child labor, slave labor. You know how that's done? Cruel and brutal organized violence of the state. To prevent unionization and so forth. $10, it's a bargain for me. But someplace back in the line, it's not a bargain for someone. Converse Rubber has since closed its plant in Malden. And I'm sure everyone's happy to get a bargain on All-Star sneakers. The question is, are we running up and down the courts in the blood of the children of South Korea? And the question is, who cares? So why don't we stop there for this evening? We'll take my part and we'll take a little break. Nice little break, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, something like that. And then we have a movie called Last Grave at Dimbaza. The purpose of the movie for this evening is that it is an encapsulation of what we've been talking about. It's at one place in one time, South Africa, but the idea is it's meant to reveal the problem as it is universally.